Welcome back to the CMO Summit. Before we get going with the next helping of inspiring content, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring this event to your screens. And don't forget to visit our website where you can access even more content and check out our in-person events. We could be coming to a city near you. Enjoy the next session.
Hi everyone, I'm very excited to be here with Peter as a part of Chief Marketing Officer Summit. And in this session, we hope to cover, I think, one topic which is quite important to a lot of existing and to-be CMOs in terms of how do you navigate a startup or a scale-up environment as a CMO. I don't think either Peter or I claim to be experts, but we're hoping some of the learnings that we've had would be helpful for the community. So with that said, Peter, why don't you introduce yourself for the viewers?
Thank you, Varun. Yeah, I'm happy to do so. So my name is Peter. I'm very happy to be here today. It's going to be really nice to speak about these interesting topics. I am the CMO of Leinster, and we are developing a SaaS learning platform, or also known as an LMS, for growing organizations aspiring to achieve maximum learning in minimum time. We launched about 5 years ago, and we're based in Stockholm, Sweden, where we have grown now to about 30 employees. And we also have an offshore tech team of roughly 15 people. On a more personal note, I've been working with building brands and doing marketing communication now for about 17 years. Time flies. I've been 6 years on the client side doing mainly B2C marketing, and then I've been 5 years on the agency side doing both B2C and B2B marketing. And I've also worked 2 years as a freelance consultant where I taught digital marketing at 2 business schools in Stockholm. Yeah, I live in Stockholm. I'm married and I have a 4-year-old son. Yeah, so I mean, that's a little bit about me. What about you, Varun?
Yeah, so I'm Varun. As you probably have all guessed, I'm CMO at Photon, and we're a consumer privacy company building an ecosystem of products with privacy as the default. So if you think about it, people like you and me can experience all the amazing things that we do on the internet, whether it's to communicate with friends, family, whether it's to collaborate at workplace, learn, or even to build a business, right? Like you talked about, but without compromising privacy. Here I lead all our growth and marketing efforts. And before this, I headed up marketing for Revolut. Revolut is a financial super app which allows you to manage all things related to money in one app. There I was overseeing marketing organization both in the HQ as well as local markets around the world where we were growing. Both have been my amazing scale-up experiences that I've enjoyed superbly, but I'm not new to tech. Before that, I've spent about 10 years in Google, heading up various areas of marketing and business across different business units. I live slightly south of you, so I live in London with my wife and a 7-year-old daughter. And again, it's a great to have children at home because they make you learn new things every day. So I think it's great to sort of do this introductions. But one question, Peter, I have for you, and Leinster being a startup, what does it mean to be a CMO for the startup? What exactly do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's been very different, I can tell you, this past 5 years. I mean, the first year, and I think everyone who's been part of a startup can relate to this. I mean, the job as a CMO, that it's really about being like a one-man band. You need to be doing everything from setting up data tracking to writing content pieces, being the webmaster, running paid media campaigns, and making sure that your stand looks great before a fair or a physical event. So the first year is really about being all over the place all the time. For us in the second year, I started to work a little bit more with junior consultants. We were still on a very tight budget, so you do what you can. I had a couple of interns in also. So I mean, Because in the second year, that's where you kind of get to the point where you start to understand a little bit more about what you're doing yourself. So it makes sense to at least involve other people a little bit more. And in the third year, that was the first time I actually got to hire a full-time employee to our team. So that was our content manager. So that was a big relief to get some really get some help there for real. And today, 5 years in the game, we're now, I would say, a well-functioning brand and marketing team of 4 people. And we also have 2 senior freelance consultants doing work around paid search and paid media. And we're working closely with our sales team, supporting them on physical events, partnership activities, and creating branded material for the sales process, etc. So for me, being a CMO has gone from like doing everything myself, meaning working very operatively, to now leading a team of superheroes, in my opinion, working more with company strategic question and also brand and marketing strategy. But to be honest, it's still a lot of operative work to be done, and I kind of like that. I like the mix, so that's no worries. Yeah, so that's a little bit about that. What about you? Can you tell me, how do you go about when you're structuring the marketing organization for a company?
Yeah. So I think, over the years, this is one of the biggest learnings I've had. And I don't think there's a perfect model when it comes to organization structure, but I think it's still one of those most important tasks for a CMO to do, as you kind of rightly also pointed out, within your 5 years, as a journey, because the org structure has a direct impact on execution. And, especially when you scale up, it becomes, really, really important. So rather than me kind of going straight away into specific org, let me talk about a few principles, which I've found it very, very useful when it comes to designing an organization. I think, first of all, it's very, very important to ensure that marketing or growth organization is reflecting the need of the business and the business goals, right? Because an organization, let's say, focusing on user growth would look very, very different to an organization which is focused on profitability, or an organization which is focused on retention. So I think as a marketing leader, it's really, really important to carefully think about what is the most important thing for the business today. And that needs to be reflected in your thinking about the organization. Because what it also does is, the business goal then becomes a North Star for a marketing organization. And then every team, every individual working in the organization can connect their work onto the North Star. Second thing is, the organization has to be set up for efficiency in execution. I mean, you spend time in a startup, I've spent time in scale-ups. So we all understand how constrained the resources are, and you're trying to do more with few things that you have. Also, I think execution is one of the biggest challenges that we all face. One of the things which I found it useful is to minimize handovers between teams, so that you can accelerate your velocity of execution, which means is if there are work streams or projects which have to be done, they should be as self-contained within a team or an individual as possible. It's not always possible, but I think if you can sort of go towards that direction, you will suddenly realize you can unlock a lot of velocity. I'll give you a classic example, right? Like, let's say you want to scale up building a website. You need an SEO manager. You probably need a few SEO copywriters. You need a designer on the website. You need a product manager who can run the whole plan. And then you need a bunch of engineers. So if you can try and bunch all these people within one team with a very clear KPI, which is related to website, I think you would be in a much better place other than, sort of finding ways where, you have to go to the brand team or the design team to get designers and things like that. I also think communication is one area which is quite overlooked many, many times. And it's very, very hard, especially as a company moves from a startup to scale up. So you can't just tap onto this person next to you and tell him or her that, this is what we want to do. And either you can go into creating silos, or things can get lost in translation. So the point about having a common North Star solves it, but I think communication is very underlooked component many, many times. So even from an org design perspective, you should ensure there are communication flows which are designed on that. And lastly, I think particularly for a growing company where culture is very, very crucial, I think it's very important to reflect that into your thinking of organization design. So let's say we have a company culture which is very centralized on decision making, right? The org structure should look very, very different versus a decentralized one. Or let's say a founder that you work with has keen interest in certain areas and wants to stay closer on those decisions. I think that also needs to be reflected in your organization design. I'm not a big believer in the old school functional structure. I think today's modern organization require cross-functional teams, which are structured in a way, as it is. So both at Proton and Revolut, the way we had designed the org was to ensure there is ownership of a particular user state, and then there is an empowerment for the team to drive that. So let me explain you a little bit better. So the teams are defined by user state. So let's start with top of the funnel. What we have is what we call as the awareness team. Their mission is to drive top of funnel metrics around awareness. So you've got content, you've got brand, you've got PR, you've got design, you've got social, which are naturally hooked on to these metrics, are part of this team. Then this team hands over the user to what we call as an acquisition team, which has sub teams like performance marketing, affiliates, partnerships, or even like growth product teams for things like referrals. And their mission is actually all about driving trials. So once a user is aware, how do you get them to try the product for the first time or unlock new users, right? And they've got everything that they need in order to drive this. Right. Then, we've got something called as engagement and monetization, and that focuses on, as the name suggests, retention, engagement, upsell, cross-sell. For a freemium SaaS business, particularly that I work with, it's a very, very important component, because you can't leave only on acquisition. You have to like equally focus on retention. So having the teams which have dedicated focus on retention, which means somebody's always looking into it. These teams tend to be more product led in nature, because the nature of execution is very much about like, what can you do once a user has already onboarded a product. But I think I found it really, really useful to have like this user state being a focus. And while these are like sort of vertical teams, focusing on a user state, we also have product marketing teams, which are more horizontal, that looks at a particular product end to end. So think of them as a conduit between the product and these vertical teams, but they holistically own user insights, proposition building, and go to market, and then they can plug in with these vertical teams to execute on that. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a lot to cover, but this is something which we have tried both at Revolut and Proton and has really, really worked for us.
I think it was really well explained. I like that. Good stuff.
Got it. Okay. One of the things I think, Peter, I wanted to ask you is about team building, right? And this is so relevant, particularly when it comes to startup, where, like you were mentioning earlier in the conversation, you're starting from scratch, right? From a one-man show to like sort of, finding who to hire, what to hire for, how do you even decide on hiring? So maybe you can talk through that with me.
Yeah, I can try. I mean, I think the important thing here is that like the first hire you do to your team in a startup will be super crucial in many ways, and it will also be like super difficult, I can tell you. And like I mentioned before, it took us 2.5 years before I could hire the first full-time employee to my team. And in other words, once that person is in place, it will be a little bit like giving away your baby to someone else. So to me, it was extremely important that the person I handed my baby over to was someone who shared my attention to details, my way of thinking when it came to processes, and also my drive to a certain extent. Eventually, you should, of course, look for people that kind of complement your own skills and perhaps challenge your way of thinking a bit more. That's super important too. But I think it's crucial that the first person you add to your team is someone that causes as little friction as possible, if you know what I mean, because you will still have tons of work to do in a startup, so there won't be much time for disagreements really. and from a competency perspective, it's of course important to make sure that the first hire has the skills needed within kind of, if you know the area you intend to focus more on. It's very important that you map this out in a startup to understand, are we supposed to go into doing more events? Are we going to do more content? Are we going to do more paid? Are we going to do more webinars? Whatever it is, that's where you should kind of focus your first hire on, and to make sure that there is actually enough room for that person to really take charge and get their hands dirty a little bit, because it can easily become like you need to do 10 or 15 different things like there is in a startup. You have so many hats in the beginning. So I think the first hire, it's important that that person can really feel like he or she is owning a particular area. So it doesn't just feels like you're dropping stuff onto that person that you don't want to do yourself, because that could be a bit too frustrating and not so engaging for that person. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. And also, like, it seems like a great journey, I must say, right? Like,
it is
sort of doing this. And I'm sure like it would have been full of challenges, right? But also, I'd imagine, your current role is full of challenges, right? Like both in terms of things that you think about, but also in light of the new macroeconomic climate. Maybe you can talk us through some of those.
Sure. I mean, for starters, if you're not a fan of challenges, you shouldn't join a startup in the first place, because there will be challenges. But I mean, that's the fun part, I believe. I mean, and for us, the biggest challenge right now is, of course, like for many other startups, it's switching from growth to profitability as primary directive. I mean, we've been working all this time for growth, and now all of a sudden it's more focused on profitability. And for us, that means we have to work smarter. We need to maximize existing team, and we need to spend our money more wisely, really. And that's going to be a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. I mean, that's how you're supposed to build a business, really. So it shouldn't be impossible. But I must say, on the other hand, we're quite happy that this recession hits now and not 2.5 years ago, because now, like, we're 5 years into the game. We have a much stronger product right now, and our internal processes are more in place, so to speak. We have doubled our staff here in Stockholm the past year, and that's a challenge in itself, to just go from a certain number and double that number. That's difficult. But now everyone is fully onboarded, and so I think we're fairly prepared for this new challenge that's going to come in 2023 with the new market and the new climate on the market. But you never know, right? But in terms of communication, we will at least switch to talk more about the sense of urgency for organizations around getting ROI from their training efforts, since that's the kind of field we're in, rather than seeing the purchase of an LMS as a long-term initiative. And luckily, our product is really great in that sense too. So, I mean, getting a modern learning system in place now can actually be a great way for organizations out there to keep their staff and grow as a company. Perhaps not always in terms of FTEs, but in terms of in efficiency, and that's going to be very important next year. So that's a little bit from me on that topic. What about you, Varun? What challenges do you face in your role? Are there any new challenges due to the current climate, you would say?
Yeah, I think you've covered most of the things, particularly with respect to the challenges every CMO is facing today. And I think your overall point about like moving from a growth mode to a profitability mode is like something I think everyone is thinking about it. Maybe I can talk a little bit more about things which are more perennial and some things which people expect or see joining an organization as a CMO. I think for any product tech organization, articulating the role of marketing and its purpose with the CEO, with the leadership team, with the board, with the broader organization is, I think, a challenge which exists and should always think about, right? I've come across many founders who said, we grew this without marketing, or people thinking marketing is just to spend money, or it's just about like, nice designs or nice events or nice webinars, right? Now, I think this is a very narrow view of marketing. I think it's much bigger than that, as you would know. If you think about it, like conceptually, marketing is about knowing the user, knowing the product, and the magic which is associated with it, and then connecting these two in order to drive the mission forward, right? When you apply this lens, you do realize to the point which I was talking about when founders say we grew this without marketing. That's not true. Actually, it's just that the founders were marketers themselves. But when you scale a company, right, like as a founder, you have like many other things to do, and to argue many things which probably are required for them to be sort of focused on. So how do you do this in an institutional way, right? As a CMO, I think figuring out how do you find the right audience, right places, right distribution points, showcasing them the right messages which caters to their needs, which means you need to understand those users really, really well. And then making sure you're able to unlock value for them on a daily basis, right? Both from a proposition, but also like feedbacking back to the product teams. You can classify these as like brand, performance marketing, product marketing, but ultimately the philosophy is about connecting the users and the product magic. And I think the role of marketing and how to ensure the wider organization, which includes product, engineering, customer support, HR, operations, leadership team, and most importantly, the CEO, that they understand this and values this, is a challenge that I think every CMO should be aware of, but also should take that on. So I think that's what I would say.
Good stuff.
Yeah,
I agree.
One thing which you highlighted earlier, which is stuck with me, is the CMO needs to do a lot to grow the company, right? Are there certain components which are needed, particularly when you're building a successful startup in terms of brand marketing, that you need to be aware, you need to convince the company that those are important, so that there are investments, support, resourcing behind it?
Yeah, I mean, there are many, of course, but I think to answer that question, I'm going to go with the product market fit model here, mainly because I've been a fan of that model since I first heard about it. I think it was in a scale-up program we participated in like 2019 now. And now after we made a few side steps, as you do, I keep coming back to the importance of this model. And the thing about the product market fit model is that it's quite straightforward, really. It's about developing a product that it's 100% fit for your target audience. Think about it. So to you as a marketer, it's really about two things. One, it's about having a deep understanding of your own product. Now, that might sound like the easiest thing in the world, but really it's not. A B2B product is usually quite a complex thing, really. And to truly understand a product that is constantly evolving takes a little bit of time. And that's time you most likely don't have as a marketeer. And also in your job as a marketer, you're likely to be the furthest away from the product in your organization. I mean, think about it. Obviously, the product team is the ones being the closest to the product, but sales team, they will also be closer as they're constantly demoing the product to prospects. And the customer success team will, of course, be very close to the product as they speak to customers about the product on a daily basis. I need to be honest here. It took me like a year before I really knew what we were building. And that's not uncommon, I would guess, in a startup, because the product is not really in place in the beginning and everything changes all the time. And you're so busy doing the stuff that you're supposed to do around marketing. So it took a long time. But to truly understand the product for you as a marketer, I think is a key thing in order to perfectly then frame in communication how your product creates value. And working closely with the sales team and your customer success team is a good advice here. So that's the first point. The second point is to understand the market and mapping out relevant product categories in your market. Now this becomes more natural to a marketeer, obviously, but this can definitely be more difficult in a startup, I would say, because I mean the board and your CEO and your sales team will most likely want to keep all doors open, so to speak, as closing deals during the first years are the only way to survive, really. So it's nothing strange about that, but still going too broad in your categories and your potential verticals can easily become super expensive from a marketing perspective. Everyone who's been working with marketing knows that if you're asked to go really broad because there is potential to be found everywhere, you're going to run out of money pretty soon. So it's going to be, of course, it's going to be expensive from a product development perspective as well, if you need to kind of build for all these demands all the time. But it's also going to be very expensive from the marketing perspective. So you risk if you keep on doing that, you kind of risk developing a product that is like 80% fit for most buyers, but 100% fit for none. So, and you're spending your marketing budget too thin over too many product categories, really. So you need to work hard with your KPIs and metrics to find ways where the entire organization can look at the data with kind of the same glasses on. And this is going to be very difficult in times like this, where you no longer can rely on like cookie data and where dark social is a fact. So, but still you need to do what you can to find the numbers that works for your organization, your entire organization, really, and then convince all kind of stakeholders which marketing activities you should invest in, and I must say this, even more important, which ones you should not invest in, because that's where you can actually save some money.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you agree?
No, so well said. And again, like you said, even I've been a very big fan of the product market fit model. I think that's kind of like the baseline before you kind of start thinking about scaling up. But you know, thinking aloud here also, but also like sort of going back, you know, we both had like a good journey in the startup scale up world, right? And I'm sure like there are many times you look back and you think, oh, I wish I knew this, or I wish I would have done this differently, especially now you know how those actions turned out. Are there things you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, there are a million things you could talk about in that sense. I mean, you should reflect as often as possible, obviously, on what you have been doing. That's also healthy and a good thing to do, but there will be very little time. So I'm going to give a little bit of a philosophical answer to this one, but maybe it will make sense. So I actually became a father for the first time 2 months after I joined Leinster. Yeah, that's true. It's not something I would recommend, to be honest, but it happened. You know, some things you can't control. But at the same time, it's funny how many similarities there are between becoming a parent for the first time and building a startup. All right, so bear with me. The first year as a parent and working in a startup are actually very similar. The most difficult thing now with being in a startup is that so much changes all the time, right? During the first years. And this is very similar to getting your first child. Just when you think you're on top of things, everything changes. Maybe your toddler starts to crawl or enters a new development phase of some kind, and everything you thought you kind of knew goes out the window. And it's very similar in a startup, like it or not. Your product is in constant work in progress. Perhaps you kind of do a pivot in the first years and change part of your target audience, or a new trend, like in your product category, forces you really to change most of your communications quite quickly. So my point here is that in the beginning of a startup journey, you are quite vulnerable, actually, much more vulnerable, I would say, compared to an established brand and an established product. Now, I only have one child, but I do hear that like people say that getting your second child is easier in many ways, but still different, of course, as every child is different. So I reckon it's the same thing with startups. I mean, if you've done a startup journey before, some pitfalls will perhaps be easier to avoid, but many things would still be different because of, you know, different circumstances. So to answer that question, looking back on mistakes I made over the past 5 years, I think a million things really could have been done differently. And, you know, that's hard to escape from. That's a fact. But the point is still, you need to make mistakes, and that's fine. That's how you learn, really. But if I should name one thing that I would have done differently now that I knew the outcome, and this is a little bit of a philosophical answer, but anyway, I would actually try to worry a little bit less, because most things work out one way or another, regardless of how you choose to solve them. So my best advice is try not to worry too much, even though that's going to be super difficult. And same goes with parenting, really. But you will enjoy the ride as a startup CMO so much more if you can just spend a little less time worrying. You know, I hope that give some kind of framing to that question, even though you could of course go into specific things that you would have done differently, but there are so many, and that's the whole point with this. I mean, you can't really fence off all those things that's going to go wrong. So learn from your mistakes and take it in, but don't worry too much. That's my advice. What about yourself, Varun? Anything you would have done differently now that you knew the outcome?
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations on being a dad or a new
Thank
dad
you.
and still being stellar at all the other things. Like, just hearing your earlier journey and now knowing that you were a dad at that time, it's I think amazing. I think you summarized most of the learnings, which probably I would have called out. The only probably 2 to 3 things I would add up is one, I think investing a lot of time for you as a CMO, but also your team in building effective relationships across the wider organization, right? So my earlier point about like articulating the purpose and value of marketing to everyone so that, they see the common view will always also allow you to do things which matter the most. Else, you could be stuck fighting useless battles, right? On frivolous things, which could become very inefficient. For example, one of the common pitfalls is like, and the way I think about it is like, not every marketer claims they can code, even if they can, right? However, I think every engineer thinks they know how to do content, social media, and PR. Which means, this misplaced brief that, everybody can do this always puts a lot of those teams in firing line, right? And in a lot of times I've seen those teams actually just managing this rather than actually doing something much more important. But if you have those relationships and people understand the true purpose of marketing, and rather than them becoming detractors, they could actually become enablers. So I think having those would be sort of my sort of first thought. The other thing is, which is my learning, and I still learn on this, is I think it's important to celebrate successes more. I think like you talked about it earlier, similarly in a scale-up environment, you spend so much time executing and many things go wrong, right? Because you haven't done that before, right? And, doing this in that context, probably not everything would be successful. Now, as humans, we tend to anchor on things because we want to fix them, right? We want to get better. But I think it's equally important that you should celebrate the wins, even if they're small, because it gives you a lot to remember, but gives you a lot to sort of positively come out of it from during those days. So I think those would be like my 2 things I would call out as my learnings.
Wow, that's really great. I couldn't agree with you more, especially on the celebrating the successes. That's something you so easily forget because you're focusing so much on the challenges. So that's really good advice there, Ron. Perfect. But you know what? We're almost out of time here. What would your closing thought be here for other CMOs, Baron? Any closing thoughts?
Yeah. So first of all, it's been a great session. I have personally learned so much from you and being reminded of so many things, which I've kind of taken notes of, which I think is great. In terms of what I would leave with, the CMOs in the community or people who are wanting to be CMO are a few things, right? First, it's very, very important to be the voice of the user, right? I don't think there is anybody else better suited or better equipped to do that, especially in a scale-up environment, because the users of a startup would have changed from users of a scale-up, right? And this change would not have been reflected across the organization and product thinking, right? One question which I think a lot of CMOs should ask to a lot of people in the company is like, okay, who's our user? Right? And you would realize there are so many inconsistencies, there's so many different personas exist between the product, between customer support, sales, marketing. And I think if you can bring in that consistency, not only you can have an impact for your own team, but also you can have an organization-wide impact, which is going to be immense. So I think that's one thing which, a lot of times is not looked into. Second, personally, take the journey as a learning journey rather than a milestone, right? And I say this because, the way you will start evaluating yourself is very, very different. The way you approach things will be very different, right? I know people call, startup as a marathon or a scale up as, a bigger marathon. But I really think, as a CMO, you should think of it as a preparation for marathon. So every day you practice, you get better. Some days you'll be too tired, you'll screw up, you won't hit your goals. But that wouldn't disappoint you because that's not a milestone. It's a journey, right? It'll actually help you motivate to do things better the next day. Also, I think, it releases a lot of pressure that you put on yourself while doing the role. Thirdly, I would say, have faith in yourself and in your team, right? Going back to the point that everybody claims to be a marketer, but nobody is, right? You and your team are there not by chance, not because, just landed there, but I think because you really are the experts, and having that faith in yourself on the expertise that which lies within the team, I think will give you a lot better mental mindset to approach things. Then I would say, stay emotionally attached, but to the mission and not to the projects, right? Because this will allow you to avoid disappointments when either the company direction change. We talked about the growth versus profitability focus change, for example, or if project gets killed, or if you have to organize yourself or the team differently. I think having that emotional attachment to the mission and not to specific projects will allow you to sort of be very, very successful. And lastly, I think, which is kind of connected to sort of your learning, is we all work so hard, right? Not because, we have to, but because we want to, right? And if you're spending majority of our day and time doing this, A, it better be worth it. B, we should be having fun, right? Otherwise, we'll never be able to unlock that 200%, which is needed for a successful role. So I think having fun and making it worthwhile is one thing which I would leave as another closing thought.
I think that's great. I mean, you wrapped it up very well. I think staying emotionally connected and having fun is the most important things here, really. And that's something I've experienced now in this fireside chat. I must say I'm very I've had a lot of fun and I learned so much, and I wish we could go on chatting about this because there are so much more to uncover, obviously, but it has to stop somewhere. And it's been a great learning experience for me. Very nice speaking to you, Varun, and I hope this has been rewarding for anyone who's been listening in as well. So thank you for today. Have a good day to you, and let's speak more soon.
Thank you. Bye.